Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the session Digital Libraries Absorbing the Abundance. The phase of initial enchantment in digital libraries is already behind us. We have been consuming the effects of digitization for quite a long time, and our expectations are constantly growing, and the available resources are far beyond control. Browsing thousands of documents a few years ago was definitely a different experience than searching through millions now. Every digital library is or soon will be facing the challenge of absorbing the abundance. Okay. Memory institutions here in Poland are kind of obsessed, we can say, with digitization. We do it very intensively. That's because we experienced one of the most tragic war losses in the history of culture, and we feel predestined to actively participate in digital preservation and sustainability initiatives. But digitization is no longer caused only by the necessity to protect heritage. We are taking the next steps in enriching the digital library user experience, facilitate research and reuse, making things interoperable and effectively consumable by both natural and artificial intelligence. We already can zoom in, search in content, attribute literary works based on the stylometric analysis, digitally partition and annotate an object without violating the integrity of the physical object. Finally, we can even automate some processes that normally would take us years, like to find every occurrence of some melody in the documents of the whole history of music. This kind of user stories are no longer science fiction. How we can deal with the abundance we are facing and what solutions we can think of for the future digital library existence? That's a question for our speakers, and they'll try to answer it, I hope. We will have a single institutional perspective, then some broader prospect of cross-institutional searching, and at the end, the current standard of interoperability as a breakthrough in digital libraries field. All our guests are involved in one of the most important initiatives aiming in setting digital objects interoperability standards called International Image Interoperability Framework, Tripleif. Our first speaker is Matthieu Bonicel. Matthieu is the head of innovation at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. After 8 years at the Manuscripts department as a curator in charge of digitization and information technologies, where he managed projects like Europeana Regia or Biblissima, and took part in international initiatives in the digital libraries world like Tripleif. He's now in charge of defining the innovation strategy for the library. The actions he sets up aim at helping librarians and patrons to develop ideas and services together, extending the visibility of the BNF in professional networks where it's not enough known, imagining the future and envisaging the role of a library in the years to come. The title of his presentation is Innovation and Digital Libraries at BNF, How to Deal with Too Much Stuff.
Okay, hi. I think this is the end of the presentation. I'll move up to the top. Okay, I'd like to tell you a few things about the comparison between the physical and digital library. I think it's kind of very important to think about it because at the BNF, we started putting online a digital library 20 years ago this year. About exactly when we started building the new National Library, which is the one near the edge of the river, if you've ever been to Paris. So we really thought that digital library that has always been called Gallica as a part of our physical library, not another tool, not a website to broadcast content or promote our stuff, but really as a library. And we act as librarians when we promote content or when we do the stuff in Gallica. So I did a few comparisons to give you a few insights of how we did stuff and how we try always to innovate during these 20 years. I won't be very technical because my colleagues there will probably be much better than me for that. So we'll just give you a librarian perspective in terms of massive collections. So Gallica and the BNF have the same qualificative for many aspects of their assets. It's big. Gallica and the BNF are both one of the biggest libraries in the world. They're universal, that's very important. Back in the 14th century, when we started collecting things in France, the king's collection was universal. Even in the Renaissance period, the king would buy Arabic manuscript or Chinese manuscript, for example. So we always try to collect not only French content, but content coming from all over the world. It's curated. Both libraries have curators and people taking charge of promoting the content and describing it. It is complex, we have to admit it. We try it not to be complicated, but it is complex. You need a lot of knowledge at some point if you need to know it very well. It's sustainable. Gallica is not a project in itself, it's a part of the library. So it relies most of the time on library budget, on permanent library budget and not on projects. We have projects to develop new stuff, but Gallica in itself is a several million euros budget every year, taken from our own share. And both are kind of old. Well, they're not the same age, but in terms of digital, Gallica is kind of a very, very big dinosaur now, being 20 years old. So, yeah, as I said, Gallica is the biggest, or ish, because we always have competitors. But with 4.3 million objects, it's one of the biggest libraries in the world. And the BNF is, so there's no one of the British Library in the room, okay. So BNF is the biggest library in Europe, and it's probably one of the biggest in the world as well. So we have size problem anyway. So Gallica and the BNF have the same qualificative, but the figures are a bit different. So Gallica is very old, which means 20 years. BNF is very old, which means for a library, a physical library, is 650 years old, because it was founded in the Middle Ages. So it's a very long time period for both. It has 4.3 million documents in Gallica, which makes it huge, but the BNF has more than 40 million objects kept in the physical stacks. On the other hand, BNF only receives 1 million visitors a year, where Gallica has 14 million users. So, and I mean single users. We're very specific when we're counting users at Gallica. So it means that nowadays we can't ignore anymore the number of visitors that we receive. For example, when we speak to the Ministry of Culture to receive money, we need to value a lot these users, because we have a bit less users in the physical room now, and we're getting more and more users in online every year. Users that would never come to the library for most of them, because we only have less than 10 times these people in the reading rooms. It's difficult to count, but I did the exercise before coming here, and we have about 300,000 square meters in the library, comparing the different sites. Probably more than a half of that is stacks, where Gallica servers and preservation system is only a few tens of square meters, just hard disks and tapes. But it is 2,000 terabytes of data. Just Gallica, the whole digital archive as BNF is about 3 petaoctets, so 3,000 terabytes. But Gallica in itself is only 2/3 of that. And as for physical collection, we have about 450 kilometers of shelving. I don't know if you're very familiar with library, but these figures are just huge. And it is a problem also for us. Dealing with huge stuff has always been our challenge, even before we dealt with the digital library. When we started building the new building in Paris, The old building in the central city, which is now being renovated, was full from the cave to the ceilings, completely full. We had added levels everywhere, and we couldn't fit any more materials in it. And 20 years after, just speaking of the physical library, we're full again. We need a new building. Our building is only 20 years old, and we're completely full. So that's also a problem. And Gallica is one answer to that, because when we've digitized content, we can sometimes unstack some of the content, of course not trash it, but not preserving in Paris, for example, because it can be accessed digitally. And so dealing with the mass of collections has always been a library job. So in that perspective, having a big digital library is not a problem in itself. The problem is the problem of scale. We have here the figures of Gallica today, and it's changing every day, but that's the figures today. We have 11,000 periodicals online, which is huge, but that's only 2.8% of the collection. We have 60,000 manuscripts, which is a bit more in terms of proportion. It's already 16%. So, and we've started putting manuscripts online only 10 years ago. Because for 10 years in Gallica, we didn't have any manuscripts. We didn't have any special collections for the 10 first years of Gallica. So we can say that maybe in 15, 20, or 30 years, which is nothing compared to the 650 years of the life of the library, we may be able to digitize everything. I say may, because digitization in terms of special collections will never be an industrial process. So we never know what we're going to find. And it can be very slow for some specific manuscripts. So I don't know how much time we'll need to process the whole manuscript, but it can be feasible. But it's not for tomorrow. We have 42,000 scores, for example. That's only 2%, again, of the collection. And we have zero video for now. And we already have 260,000 videos kept in the collections. And we're getting more and more and more of digital native content every day. And for now, nothing of that, nothing of the recent creation is visible in Gallica, mainly for copyright issues, but also for technical issues as well, because it's more difficult to put in a digital library digital content. That's something a bit bizarre, but that's the fact. It's easier to digitize a book and put it on image in a digital library than to treat digital native content for lots of preservation issues. We do have an in-house version of Gallica where we have copyrighted materials, so the figures are a bit better if you go in-house and look at the digital library from the reading rooms. But it's still something complex to address, that Gallica will never be the real reflect of the physical library, because it's way smaller and because it cannot cope with the constant changes in terms of formats. That being said, this is Gallica 16 years ago. I won't talk about design. But that was only 9,000 documents. 10 years after, a new interface, we had only 1.2 million documents, and today it's 4.3 million. So it's growing very fast, and the interface is changing also very fast. So we're adding a lot. We had to add a lot of functionalities. That version of Gallica merely allowed you to download PDFs. That was it. In that version, it was not yet interoperable, but you could browse. That was a publicity for a new exportable viewer, because 2010 was the time where Facebook in France became huge, and so we needed to have an exportable viewer to be able to export our images in social networks. That was the first very premises of interoperability, being able to show your image outside of your. It worked in Flash, it was a bad technology, but at that time it allowed us to be visible outside of the library and not only in library systems. And that was also a time when we did a lot of projects. So, of course, when we started doing digital libraries, users thought that it was the dream came true, where we could recollect spread out objects. One of the first purposes of digitization from the beginning was to try and reconstruct collections that has been spread out all over the world because of history. One of the biggest projects we did at the beginning, and that was the first beginning of digitization for manuscripts at the BNF, was the International Dunhuang project. I don't know if you know Dunhuang, that's a group of caves in Central Asia, where at the beginning of the 20th century, an English archaeologist and a French archaeologist found and brought to Europe, let's say it that way, thousands of manuscripts and paintings. Nowadays, these collections are spread out between China, Japan, and mostly England, and UK and France. And there's a team who's been working on building up a website to reconstruct the collection. But it is a very old-fashioned digital libraries because it's local storage. So every institution has to digitize and then send the images to the British Library, or do local servers, but they were a very old-fashioned connection. So, and they built that website. This is the website at its stage in 2007, and it is still the case, it's still like that today. So if you're going to idp.bl.uk today, you still have
framework. How many people in the room haven't heard of Tripleif or don't know what it is? Great. I don't feel like I'm wasting my time telling you what it is. So, Tripleif is a large corporate, partnership of libraries and museums and corporations who are looking at image interoperability between digital collections. At the moment, there are 47 founding member institutions, and a founding member just means that they pay money. There's a small fee that an institution pays in order to be part of the community. But outside of that, those 47 members, there are 70 implementing institutions. So these are institutions and organizations that are implementing Tripleif technology in their workflows. And I've just put together a list of them, and you can just sort of see them go by. There's a few big names on here. There's the British Library, the BNF, Stanford, Harvard, Yale. It's not a fly-by-night sort of thing. It's actually a very important and very promising effort. So the basics. So what are the basics of Tripleif? When you talk to me and we get in the elevator and you say, so tell me about Tripleif before we get to the 12th floor, I will tell you it is divided into two parts. The first part being the image API and the second part being the presentation API. The image API, you can think of it as a way of constructing a URL, so an address, to an image. And this basically standardizes the way that libraries can publish their images online in ways that people will know and expect how to be able to request them. So in this case, I've highlighted a bit of the structure where you can see the orange is some sort of identifier for that image. You can ask for a region, so just a smaller chunk of the image. A size, so how big do you want it? You can rotate it, and then you can do some sort of image type. So if you wanted black and white or lower resolution, you can put that into your request as well. So if you load this URL in your web browser, you will get back the image that I've shown you. One of the most powerful aspects of this API, though, is that if you change some of these parameters, you can start looking at and addressing dynamic bits of an image. So if you put this URL in your browser, you will get this little caterpillar. And what the server is doing is it's responding to your request and automatically cropping out and zooming that image for you. So it's really very powerful because it means that we can support zooming interfaces, we can support all sorts of really interesting uses of digital library images. The second one is the presentation API. So the presentation API I sort of struggle trying to explain this because you really have to sort of dig into it and understand it. But it's a representation of document structure and metadata, which we call a manifest. So imagine you have a book with 500 pages. Each page is represented by an image. The manifest tells you which image is page 1, which image is page 2, which image is page 3, and so on. And I sort of like to think of it as a PDF, except that the images are somewhere else. So if I get a manifest from the BNF and I load it in my Tripleif viewer, I can see it and it will load the images from Gallica, or it will load the images from the British Library or any number of other implementers. And there are a number of Tripleif compatible image viewers that you can use to view these manifests. So Mirador is the biggest one supported by the Tripleif community, but there are several other implementations of these. So that's Tripleif. That's in a nutshell. There was recently a survey sent out to the community about how people are implementing it in their institutions. And one of the numbers that came back was that how many images have you made available in your collection over a Tripleif image API? And the number that came back added up to about 335 million images. That's a really big number. That's really amazing. It represents a lot of world culture and world knowledge. And so this, I think, is fantastic, but this is a problem. Because of 335 million images, how do you find just one? How do you find your unicorn in this sea? How do you look and see what you want in this? So today I'll try to answer that, and I'll use music as the way that I can answer it. But it's important to know that the technologies that I show aren't limited to music, and the techniques aren't necessarily limited to music. So what makes Google Books special? I sort of would put forward that what makes Google special is that when you do a search, so I've put in Renaissance music improvisation here, and I click search, and I get a book. I find a book. Somebody's gone in, they've done a picture of this book, and what's happened behind the scenes is that Google has performed optical character recognition, and so when I do a search for words, it matches the words on this optical character recognition, but then aligns it with the image. So you see this invisible layer of text over top of these images. And this makes it powerful for a very basic reason, is that optical character recognition is awful. It's really, really, really bad. It makes a lot of mistakes. If you were to read the OCR text directly, you couldn't read it. It would just be gibberish a lot of times. But it's good enough for search. It's good enough so that if I put in a few words, it doesn't have to match all of the words. It just matches a fragment of it. And then it brings me to the image where I can read the text. So the image is a really great representation of the document. And I can find my stuff in that image by doing text search. What if we wanted to do the same thing for music, or for other images? So let's take these two manuscript images. One is from my library, the Bodleian, and another is from the Bayerische Staatsbibliothek in Munich. And the two of these are Gutenberg Bibles, and they're the beginning of Genesis, and I want to do the same sort of thing. I want to type in a Latin phrase, and I want to bring back, highlighted on that image, where that phrase occurs. And I want to do this so that my users can find this stuff across all of these libraries. So we do this by image recognition. We can use image recognition technologies, of which there are many, to analyze images for their contents and extract things out of them. So you could imagine that we would develop a Gutenberg Bible recognition system that would know how to read the Latin text and know how to index that text and know where on each page image that text occurs, so that if my user comes in, does a search, I'll be able to show them, highlighted on the image, where that text is. And we can expand this to other things. We could say, show me all of the faces in your collection of paintings, or show me all the pictures of cats in your paintings. We could say other things like, show me all the images that are similar to this out there on the web. If we have 335 million images to index, we can do a lot of stuff by cross-correlating and looking at that collection. But how do we do it? How do we use these 335 million images? So we're developing a technique we're calling distributed document image recognition. And the way it works is, I'll show you how it looks now. So image recognition now, you have institutions, and they'll have a collection of images, and they'll do some sort of process. They might do some sort of process. We'll call it OCR. It could be something else. And then they feed that into a search engine. Then when our users come, they can sort of look in that search engine and find the images from that institution. So it's really useful for them to be able to search the images, but of course there's no easy way to connect these things so that they can search in one place and find things across institutions. Other problems are that if you're doing this for 70 institutions, you need to download and rehost these images. So we can't distribute the hosting to the libraries. We need a central place to do this. And currently it's dependent on the institution to implement these technologies. Gallica has to sit there, and they have to have programmers that are developing all these image recognition systems again and again and again in order to enable this for their users. So distributed, we sort of take the Tripleif image API, and we take the images out, we do the OCR, and the users interact with the search engine, but we don't actually rehost the images. We just take them, look at their contents, and then store the URL back to the image. So we can do this sort of highlighting and understanding of regions of images without needing to rehost them. So we can build multiple search engines on top of this. So OMR, optical music recognition, we might do facial recognition, we might do similarity matches, or we might do anything, and we might make these search engines that work on top of multiple collections. So institutions get to host their own images. We can search across institutions. Anyone can build their own image search system. And we can do other things outside of these institutions with the metadata. So we can expand and catalog the images in more scientific ways than a library could on its own. So I have a few examples here. And this is a 10th century chant manuscript. It comes from Switzerland. It's hosted by an organization called eCodices. eCodices is a digital library of manuscripts that's in Switzerland. And they're a Tripleif implementer. So they help, they promote and publish their material over Tripleif. So if we look at this, we have an image viewer, we load in the manifest, and then we can scroll through the book. You can zoom in and out on it by double-clicking, and you can get high-resolution images. Again, this all happens by the use of these URLs so that we can dynamically request different resolutions of the image. So zoom in and out, scroll up and down, but then we've done optical music recognition on top of this. So we've looked at what each of these signs are, and what their labels are. So at any point, we can hover over each of the symbols to know what it is and where it is on the page. So we've done the OMR. The images that we're looking at are actually in Switzerland. So we host the OMR data in Montreal, and the images, when we load it into the browser, they come out from a server in Switzerland. Because we know the locations of all these images, we can do some really cool things. So Matthieu showed us a really old website for musical paleographers where they would cut and paste images. Well, what we can do is make a dynamic version of this. So I can say, show me all, so here's a list of all the neumes, all the symbols in that, manuscript, and I can dynamically click and have the system show me just neumes of a certain type. And I can look at it, but I can also have it link back to the original image on the Swiss server. So I can generate these things out of fairly dynamically just by knowing the regions of symbols that I'm looking for. Is that clear to everybody? Everybody get it? Okay, cool. What it also means is that we can use Tripleif to support additional, wrapping additional data around images. So in this example, we have worked with a group in Canada called the Cantus Project. The Cantus Project has been indexing chant manuscripts for 30 years. They started in the 80s at some point. And they've been painstakingly cataloging all of this data, but they've been doing independent of images because they can't actually, there was until now no mechanism to actually align their data with the images. So what we've done is we've aligned manuscripts with images. So in this case, we have Paris 12044, which the images are hosted from Gallica. So when we look at the demo here, when we scroll through this image, through this manuscript, the images are being loaded from Gallica, but on the side, you see the metadata coming in from the database. So we've aligned the image and the metadata together so that you can browse the manuscript, but you can also search it. So type in a few words, you get the results, you know where the page is, so because you've aligned it, and you can browse this manuscript by adding additional metadata around it. I'll just let this play out. I can't control it. Because there's a second manuscript that we'll look at. This is a manuscript that's held in Canada. Again, we host the images, but we've done this alignment of metadata and images. So this is an antiphonal, originally from Belgium, but is now in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Same sort of thing. You scroll through it, you can see the data, but you can also do a search. So if we do a search, we can perform OMR on this book, and just like we did before, we can do a search for sequences of pitches and have the results brought back to us dynamically. So right now, what I'm seeing in this is little snippets that are dynamically generated from the OMR, and then I can browse this book from the musical content. So we've done music notation, recognition, alignment, and now my results can be highlighted on the original images so that we can highlight that to our users. So a few final thoughts. If you're a library and you're not using Tripleif, or you're not even thinking about it, I would encourage you to get in touch with the community. If you have images, we're really interested in having you involved. And I think the the gains that you will get out of being involved in this community will outweigh the cost. I mean, there is no cost. So right there, it's a pretty good value proposition. What it means for your institution, though, is that you become interoperable with other institutions as well. So if you have a special painting or a special manuscript or a special work, and a scholar wants to compare it to, say, a copy in another institution, there's fewer barriers to entry for them in order to use that content in from your library. And like I said, this distributed technique isn't just for music. You can imagine sort of a face recognition database where we scan the Rijksmuseum and the Ashmolean and a number of other museums for faces that were painted by the same painter or something, and just have a database of faces or any other content. So what I've shown you today is a use case in music, but this distributed technique, I think, can be applied across many different types of institutions and many different types of collections. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Are there any questions, comments? If not, we can proceed. And our last speaker is Benjamin Albritton. Ben is Associate Curator for Paleography and Digital Medieval Materials at Stanford University Libraries and a Product and Service Manager for the Stanford Digital Library Systems and Services. He oversees a number of digital manuscript projects, including Parker Library on the Web, Stanford University's digitized medieval manuscripts, and a number of projects devoted to interoperability and improving access to manuscript images for pedagogical and research purposes. His research interests include the intersection of words and music in the 14th century, primarily in the monophonic works of Guillaume de Machaut, the subject of his PhD dissertation from the University of Washington. The uses of digital medieval resources in scholarly communication and the transmission models in the later Middle Ages. He will talk about interoperability and abundance. What can we do with all this data?
Thank you, Sonia. And thank you to my fellow panelists, and thank you all for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. So, when Sonia set us up with this idea of responding to abundance as digital libraries, I think we've all sort of hit on the same problems. So some of what I say today may be reinforcing things that both Matthieu and Andrew said. But I'm going to start off by talking about 4 challenges that we've found at Stanford specifically. First of all, access to world cultural heritage content. Second of all, interoperability and abundance, so playing off of the things that Andrew's been talking about. A real challenge for us has been enabling use of this material for our stakeholders at Stanford and then with partners around the world. And finally, an emerging problem that is starting to scare us, which is the curation of all of the digital data being created about cultural heritage objects that we oversee. And there's a secret 5th challenge, which is that once you curate it, then you have to then go back and make it accessible and start the whole process over again. So let's start with access. I'm going to tell you a little bit about who we are as a library. Stanford was founded in the late 19th century. So when Matthieu says his library has been around and collecting for 650 years, it makes us feel very inadequate. Our collections are small, and as you might guess, mostly focused on American and California history. So we've got a lot of things from the 19th century. If you want pictures of the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, we can help you out. If you're particularly interested in American football games from the mid-1950s, we can do that. However, amongst our 1.5 million objects, there are 300,000 pictures of cars. That forms a bit of a problem for us in dealing with students and faculty who are studying European cultural heritage and non-European cultural heritage as well. Because amongst all of our collections, we only have a whopping 387 medieval pieces, and they are mostly fragments and leaves. So we wanted to figure out ways to serve our users. One early approach was just to ingest a bunch of content from other institutions. We partnered with Cambridge University and Corpus Christi College in Cambridge to digitize the Parker Library there, an important 16th century library. But that costs a lot of money. It's human time, storage costs, shipping hard drives back and forth across the Atlantic. There's a sustainability question because we are so far away from the actual owning institution. And we have an ongoing problem of separating the content from the people who really care about the physical objects. So we've tried to move beyond that. The second option, of course, is to send our users to hundreds of different websites, portals across the world where content is held. We don't have jet cars yet in 2017, but we can certainly do better for our users than making them visit hundreds of different websites to see content that they're interested in. So we adopted fairly early this approach of interoperability, collaborating with institutions around the world with ways to share content so that we don't have to host it. We can share the pieces of content that we have with the world that may want to see it, but we can also then bring that content back in for our users. Andrew and Matthieu have already talked a little bit about what Tripleif is, so I'm going to gloss over this. Don't worry, Sonia is running a workshop tomorrow on Tripleif, and we'll go into great detail about implementation processes. So in short, Tripleif started as the International Image Interoperability Framework. It's expanding to do AV, 3D, and other types of materials now. As Andrew pointed out, it's a set of APIs, or programming interfaces. It's a growing suite of software. So for a number of institutions, having access to free open software in their repositories is important, and the community recognizes that. And most importantly for institutions like ours, Tripleif is a community. So even though our collections are not very large, we can collaborate with Oxford and the BNF and Poland, and suddenly there's a huge amount of content, an abundance of content that we can provide to our users. As a quick reminder, a lot of what I'm going to show you today relies on the Tripleif Image API, which is simply a URL structure for manipulating images off of a host server. To give you an idea of who's participating, Andrew showed you a list of participating names. This is a visualization of where we are in the world, spread quite far and wide at the moment, and hopefully we'll be adding more users and institutions over time. Andrew also mentioned this figure, 335 million compatible objects. We were all quite surprised by that number when it came back to us from the survey. And it's also, again, slightly frightening because we immediately then start dealing with the questions of abundance that you might imagine. One of the things that abundance has done for us is move us rapidly out of a user-focused content ownership paradigm. That is, as Andrew and Matthieu have already said, a user now doesn't have to download the images and manipulate them, but can in fact take advantage of this material as if it were a subscription online. To take that to the world of medieval manuscripts, where I inhabit, 3 or 4 years ago, this is what the number of manuscripts in Tripleif looked like. The largest institution was the Swiss manuscript group, eCodices, and they had about 1,500 manuscripts. All of the other projects were down in the hundreds. This was still quite a lot of abundance for medievalists who were used to looking at microfilm or single images that they purchased from institutions. So that was pretty exciting for us. Within the last 2 years, though, that abundance has been dwarfed because of the entrance into Tripleif of some very large cultural heritage institutions like the BNF and the Vatican. Suddenly, we have more content online than any single scholar has ever seen in the past. In high resolution, so that you can see the pen strokes, You can see the brush strokes and artworks. And that really changes the game for what we're trying to do. And moves us into the question of use. So, what can we do with all this data? Well, one simple answer is just look at it. There's nothing wrong with that. 335 million images. Browse for a while. The second answer is you can compare things more. Look at it in more detail. You can focus in on the brushstrokes on Van Gogh, his ear anyway. Or you can do things like medievalists want to do and compare data. In the old days, one might have to go to the Huntington Institution website to see their copy of the Chaucer Canterbury Tales. Or you could go to the National Library of Wales, look at their Chaucer. Now, we can bring those two objects together in a website anywhere and do things like deep zoom, compare the two, look at orthography, see that the scribe in one case is spelled April with a P and sometimes with a V. And we can start creating annotations about those that stay associated with a digital object. And that way we can pass on our observations to others. One of the things to stress, again, is that this isn't an image that's been brought into Stanford and manipulated there. The images are actually coming from the host institutions. We can compare a manuscript hosted in Switzerland with one hosted in Wales, with one hosted in California, as if they were co-located. In addition, we can do things like transcribe and make those transcriptions available to the world so that we can open up discovery for difficult-to-read hands. In this case, every single line of a Bayenef manuscript has been transcribed. And when Matthieu is ready for it, we'll give him those transcriptions back. In the meantime, though, the transcriptions live in California, the images are coming from France, and we can put them together in the interface as if they were one single object. This sort of abundance also invites a larger scale analysis. So I'd like to talk a little bit about a project that we did at Stanford 3 or 4 years ago now with the Parker Library images. So we were looking at about 200 manuscripts, and we had 70,000 images. And what we wanted to do was find out if a machine learning algorithm could recognize decorated initials across all of those images. So we partnered with a group in Montreal. We were hosting the images, they were doing the processing in Montreal, and all we sent them were Tripleif URLs. They processed the images, and all they sent us back were URLs with regions of interest on them. So using that Tripleif API that Andrew was talking about, we were just picking out the regions where the algorithm thought that there might be a decorated initial. And then we can use those URLs to verify. So there is a single image sitting at Stanford for each page that you're seeing. And all we're asking for from the image server is that one little region of interest that the machine learning algorithm told us was a decorated initial. We got back over 10,000 of these. So we sent them some more information and asked them to find all of the rubrics, the red writing in the manuscripts. We got back almost 50,000 of those. So that sort of approach can give us new perspectives on our collection. We can invite people into our content by looking at the images first, and as Andrew was pointing out, then sending them back to the original content. But this also becomes a bit of a curatorial nightmare, as I'll talk about in a minute. So this, what we've been talking about here a little bit, is all very scholarly. We've actually been doing analysis in enabling use for scholars. Tripleif can do other things as well, though. So we can make games with it. In this case, we've got regions of interest from a manuscript from the Walters Art Museum, and we've got a rather simple make-a-word game where you can spell digital if that's really what you want to do. So it doesn't have to be scholarly at all. We can also make puzzles from the content. See if that works. There we go. So again, I'm not downloading that image and cutting it up. This image is being served directly from the BNF, and we're simply manipulating the pixels in your browser so that you can play around with these images. This has given some pause to curators because we have no way of controlling this. And again, there's this paradigm of control that we have to let go of. People are going to want to do things with our cultural heritage materials. We should let them, because they'll do something that's creative, interesting, and that we can all learn from. So, oh, and that puzzle is live, so if you want to go play with it, go for it. I'm not going to wait until it took me a long time to solve it, so we'll just skip ahead. So, let's talk a little bit about curation. Like I said, we're getting back tens, sometimes hundreds of thousands of new pieces of data about our cultural heritage objects. And I don't know about my co-panelists here, but at Stanford, we don't know what to do with this. It's sort of starting to stack up on servers. We've got lists of information, but we don't exactly know how to curate it. And I think that's a good problem to have. So we can spend the next year or so trying to figure out how all of this data fits together, what bits we think are worth saving, which bits we think are ephemeral. But that's certainly going to be our focus at Stanford for the next few years, is figuring out how to bring all of this linked data into some sort of environment where people can access it, discover it, and then build on it. So finally, because we're here in Warsaw, in Poland, I wanted to share with you a sketch, a Chopin sketch that we have in our collection. Our collection is mostly single leaves, but we happen to have a piece by Chopin there, written in the early 1830s. We can show you that sketch side by side with a letter that Chopin wrote about the same time that's held at the BNF. If I were a student in school, I might be able to build a display like this to show something about a school project about Chopin, let's say. And with any luck, very soon, there will be Polish institutions sharing their content by Tripleif so that you could do this, add your content here, and contribute to this large body of data that's growing, overwhelming us, but in a very exciting way. So thank you.
Thank you, Ben. So now we have almost 20 minutes for a discussion, questions. Feel free to ask our panelists. Okay.
These were three very excellent presentations. I'd like to ask each speaker, all three of you, this question: how are your respective institutions addressing or confronting the challenge of digital obsolescence? I'm old enough to remember microfiche, microfilm, CD-ROM, mag tape. Those are physical media. 10 years ago, 5 years ago, XML was the format of choice. The last word, now it's JSON. JSON's presumably going to be superseded by something else in the future. The IIIF framework is tremendous. It's a really great achievement. Where will it be 200 years from now? And I would even posit that print will outlast the IIIF framework. So this is, I know, for libraries, the supreme challenge, because none of us will be around when the problem is acute. So please.
I'll start and then pass things along. We're embracing digital obsolescence, if that makes sense. We understand that all of the front-end systems we build have a lifespan of about 3 to 5 years. So we're focusing on robustness of data and preservation and access to the data, and then building APIs in the middle so that we can continually change our front-end software, occasionally change that middleware, and rarely change the back-end. That having been said, I think we're still on a 10 to 20-year paradigm with that data, where the book is a centuries paradigm, and it'll take a while to figure that out.
I think what we do is we look to standards and make sure that we're aligning ourselves with open standards. With the Tripleif, it's an open standard. XML, we still use it quite a bit. I mean, it's a fundamental part of our workflows, and I don't think it's going away anytime soon. That's built on Unicode and open standards. Our image formats are JPEG 2000, which is an open standard. So I think by not boxing ourselves into proprietary formats and worrying about things getting locked up, there will be a way forward. I mean, we're going to migration, data migration is inevitable in the work that we do. So we just need to make sure that when we need to migrate it to the new format, that we haven't cut our legs out from under us 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah, so at the BNF, the answer is kind of twofold. So we, from the reproduction and the physical or digital surrogate that we create, it's kind of easier. So we have something called SPAR, which is the Système Pérenne d'Archivage Réparti. So that's a very specific computer system that is preserving the original file image that we create, and then it's replicating the formats all the time. Every time it comes obsolete, we create a new format. We always keep the original plus 2 versions, and we have a system that is automatically managing everything. And microfilm and microfiche, for example, have all been digitized, and now they're online in Gallica. So we are migrating our surrogates all the time to keep up to the interface, and we assume, as Ben said, that at some point it becomes obsolete. So we find a new version of that, and we try to migrate. And for that, I would say we spent a lot of time and money on it, and I think we're kind of secured now. It's not working perfectly, but it's working fine. We didn't lose any data for now. The big issue, and my colleague Jean-Philippe from the audiovisual department is in the room, he could answer probably better than I do. The very big issue we have is for born digital native. So these files that have been created in proprietary formats like video games or computer softwares that we receive as legal deposit as well, and we need to open them up in computers where they can't run because they're not on the good version of QuickTime, or they're not on the good computer and we have no video player that can play the game anymore. So Jean-Philippe's team is working on emulation, on trying to do digital archaeology of these files to make sure they can be reopened in 20 years or 50 years or 100 years to come, because researchers are already coming now to reopen video games from 20 years ago, and it's already a challenge. So we're looking very closely now into these born digital formats because we don't know exactly what to expect. Because on the paper era, you didn't have that much formats. You had formats in terms of sizes, and you need to adapt your stacks, and that we have centuries of experience in that. But nowadays we receive new formats every day, and it's a very big issue to keep up to the speed where the digital is going. So that would be for the years to come my major concern is born digital native stuff, because this is very difficult. And it's an issue for us, how we communicate, how we can disseminate. There's a huge copyright issue, DRM, things like that. We've just signed an agreement to receive now, as a flow, the digitally distributed music. So like Spotify, Deezer, Apple Music is going to deposit the files to the BNF for what is sold in France through an aggregator. But we have like 5 to 6 years that will come, because it took 5 or 6 years to sign the agreement. So 5 or 6 years of music that we didn't receive as CDs will come at once to the BNF in the weeks to come. And so then we have to catalog them. So it would be like boom. And the catalogers that used to catalog with a CD and leaflet will have to do everything on screen, and receiving some raw metadata, usually in a condition. So, and then they need to reformat the data. So that's also obsolescence, because it's obsolescence of metadata. So we need to reformat the data to the scale. And if we want to keep up to abundance, we also need to work with the partners, to work with the publisher more intensively than we used to do, to make them understand that they need to standardize better the data. Otherwise, we won't be able to treat the data when they come to the library. So it's also a way of trying to work on this, like be one pace ahead with producers to help them produce data which is more sustainable than changing formats all the time.
Any other questions?
I'm curious about the precision of the search for the manuscripts. I mean, how precise are these tools used to define whether it is this letter or that letter, and how refined are the tools allowing to search into artworks? I mean, for example, just starting from the face, or is it this person or other person, going to the style of the artist?
So there's a lot of work being done right now in what's called deep learning, and it's a work pioneered primarily by institutions like Google and Facebook for doing machine learning, so large amounts of statistical data about things. They use it for music, but there have been very promising results in things like getting a computer to understand the style of Rembrandt and reproduce it. And in order for it to understand that, it needs to be able to have, 100 Rembrandts of all different shapes and sizes and qualities, and understand what makes that painting and what makes that style. So you can imagine it's just a matter of swapping, instead of make me a Rembrandt, find all the other Rembrandts out there. So, and that would be based on style. For things like character recognition, it's highly dependent on the script and on the flexibility of the recognition system. So if you have a system that's trained to only see one type of letter C, for example, or letter A or letter B, and it doesn't know that there are other ways that those letters can be formed, well then it won't find them. But if you have enough training data, if you have enough data that will say, no, when I mean A in all of these different styles, then it just finds them. It's a computer, it does what you tell it to do and no more. Yeah, I think it's really exciting. It's only going to get better.
To build on that a little bit, there's a project in Paris run by a paleographer named Dominique Stutzmann called Himanis that is working on a similar sort of deep learning algorithm looking at words instead of letter forms. And they're now able to index entire manuscripts, including teaching the algorithm to expand manuscript contractions. So it looks very promising. I expect big things from them in the next 2 to 3 years as they learn more about that approach.
Are there any questions, comments?
I would like to ask about photos, because you speak about characters, you speak about work of arts. What about photos? Because, of course, face recognition works there. What about background? Yeah, because maybe someone will be searching for a place. not for a person really, because searching for a person probably would be doable if it's not doable already. But what about buildings, landscapes, and all that would probably be useful to a lot of people.
So I think your question is about using these systems to find, say, maps of the same place? Or I would be surprised if there wasn't. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I would be surprised if nobody was working on that.
Yeah, there's the thing is, for understanding how the machine works, you need to understand that the machine doesn't know anything about the landscape or doesn't have any indexed. It is just comparing stuff and giving you clues of what could be the same thing. And for example, if you show the machine two pictures of the same place with a huge difference, but the same skyline behind, for example, the deep learning will automatically recognize that what you're looking for is the skyline. So it will search the other images for the skyline, no matter what is in front, for example. So you could see, comparing the evolution of the landscape over the ages, if there is a similarity somewhere in the images, and you give him 2 or 3 images of the same place over the time, then it will automatically understand that what you're looking for is this part of the images, and it will bring you more and more images like that. There's a project called Replica in Switzerland by the EPFL, École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, and Dr. Frédéric Kaplan, who's the team leader. And for example, he made with this machine the example of Canaletto. You have the bell tower, the very famous bell tower. If you give the machine just one, it will give you always the same view of the bell tower and the place. But if you, on the image, you just draw the shape of the bell tower, and you ask the machine just to look for that, then it will find you night scenes of this. So it will not take into account if it's day or night, because what it is looking for is the shape of the bell tower, for example. And you can say the machine, at the first round, you click yes or no to the first images, and you relaunch the search, and so it will take into account not only one image, but 3 of them, and compare them in between, and find resemblance for the whole set. So that's the way it works. You know, if you tell the machine what you're looking for in the image, then it will ignore the rest. So it can be a way to look for landscape evolution or landscape by day, by night, under rain, etc. No matter, because it's the format which is searched for. And it's very accurate. I mean, when you do that, it's barely getting wrong, because it's looking for very specific points in the image.
And there are several projects that are out there that are working on interfaces for humans to be able to specify the shape or the region that they're looking for. There's a project at Stanford in the Digital Humanities group called HistoNets that was designed to automatically analyze road networks, and they have abstracted that so that you can just highlight a region on an image, a photo for instance, and it will find all other examples of that particular image. You can shift parameters for it, so if it's not particularly accurate the first time, you can run it again and shift those parameters a second time until you get the results that you're really after.
Okay, we have still some time for one last question.
Okay. Last question, a bit technical. One of you mentioned JPEG 2000 as the format of choice. Can we learn some more about it? what to do with all those, I don't know, other formats?
So I say JPEG 2000. JPEG 2000 is our storage format. Our imaging services shoots in TIFF. One of the problems with TIFF, though, is that it's had a very long and troubled history, and it doesn't always say what it is, and there's not a whole lot of, there are problems, there are holes in the specification that have implications for digital preservation. JPEG 2000 for us is better specified, so we can tell when something is wrong with the file. It's better structured as a data format. It also gives us the ability to use a single file for both preservation copy and dissemination copy. So we can use one file as our distribution copy. It powers our user interfaces, and also it's the lossless format. It's what we've got. If we were to open it up, it would be faithful to the original that we put in, and that represents a huge data savings too, because when you're working at a scale like any of our libraries, I mean, you know, 2 petabytes. If that's 2 petabytes of JPEG 2000, it would be, you know, 200 petabytes of TIFF. So it's really represents a big savings as a format.
If I start now and use JPEG 2000, what to do with all my TIFFs?
Convert them to JPEG 2000.
So we're in exactly the same situation. We add TIFFs for all our collections up in like 4 or 5 years ago, and we kept using TIFFs for manuscripts just because of the contract with the company until I think 2 or 3 years ago, and now we've moved everything to JPEG 2000 because it's a lot less storage, and also it's easier to get it on the fly for Tripleif and things like that. So we're very happy with JPEG 2000. We did a huge survey about how much compression we should take on that, and so we chose the very more careful situation for that. But we kept the TIFFs that we had before, so we still have them because our policy is never to change the original shooting format. So we kept the TIFF as they are, but we have a JPEG, but not a JPEG 2000, JPEG conversion for display, and maybe there's a JPEG 2000 layer somewhere. But we didn't go back to what we did because we can do that with everything now if we started this kind of strategy. So we kept the TIFFs, and then we switched to JPEG 2000 like 2 years ago for everything, and it's been totally fine so far.
Okay, thank you. If you have any other questions or you are curious about Tripleif, want to learn more, please attend the workshop tomorrow, Innovative Libraries, in the National Library of Poland. Our guests will be there for 6 years to answer all of your questions. Thank you very much once again.